started shooting local events when I was 14 in 2008. A year later, I was shooting professionally at D1 Grand Prix. It is such a big learning curve going from the Pro-Am level to the Pro Spec level. The cars are way more powerful. I went from, a 480 horsepower motor to an 800 horsepower motor. And at first it was kind of too much for me to drive.
I was just thinking when you said 800, like how much land would you need to have 800 horses? There, like it is a lot of horses.
It's just like riding a roller coaster, but hopefully you're not going upside down. That would be really bad. And luckily that's never happened to me before, knock on wood. I just try to drive the line that I try to drive. And I guess it just happens to be fast because I don't really lift a whole lot. And it was really scary to do because you're pointed at a wall. And if you mess up and you don't end up switching back and transitioning, then you're just going to plow straight into a concrete wall and that's going to hurt. Would love to secure a top 3 position in the championship for Formula Drift ProSpec. And then on the Gambler series, I'm in a really close battle for first. Feel free to check me out on Instagram at nathaniel.chen, on Facebook at Nate Chen Racing, and on YouTube at nate.chen.
It's drift season here on Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm your host, F1 Black. Following on from our recent interview with Formula Drift co-founder and president Ryan Sage, today we welcome Nate Chen. Nate is competing in his 4th year in the Formula Drift ProSpec series. In this episode, we'll live through Nate's dual life behind the wheel of an 800 horsepower machine and a successful executive in his own right. If you're after a bit of inspiration, then this one's for you. So, without further ado, Nate, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. Yeah. Well, we were talking in the virtual green room that it's 10:30 here in the UK. So I'm guessing 5:30 there in Washington. You've just finished work. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, they love to say it's always 5 o'clock somewhere, right? So I guess it is 5 o'clock over here, but no beverage other than this Steck water bottle with me today, unfortunately.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you got interested into motorsport and what your first memory is?
I can remember loving cars and racing ever since I can remember. I think my first words were Volvo. I grew up watching the 1960s cartoon that my dad used to watch called Speed Racer and was really into NASCAR. That was kind of the only really popular motorsport here in the United States in the 90s when I was a child. So loved Kyle Petty, the 44 Hot Wheels car with the blue and red wheels, and paid an homage to that car in my rookie season in Formula Drift ProSpec in 2021. And I found drifting through my love of the Fast and the Furious franchise. I saw a trailer, not even the full movie, of Tokyo Drift when I was 12 or 13, and thought drifting was really, really cool. Did a bunch of research on it, figured out that Formula Drift was the professional drifting series in the United States, and got my dad to take me to Summit Point in 2007. And I just remember, being in the autograph line, which was super cool, getting to meet all of my heroes. Back then it was Tanner Faust, Sam Hubinette, the Signal Auto R34 GTR, my all-time favorite car because of its crazy paint scheme. It has this beautiful Mazora paint that's like purple and chameleon, depending on how the light hits it. And so getting to see that car drive in person was super cool. And it was a really great time. And now I've driven that track a zillion different times, and especially that layout in particular in 2007 kind of has a 90 plus mile an hour entry. I don't quite know what that is in kilometers, but it's really fast and pretty dangerous. And it's really cool to say that, I've been on obviously the spectating side when I was 13, and then I've driven that same layout. So ever since then, I wanted to be involved in motorsport at a deeper level. And so, yeah, that was kind of my first memory of drifting in person.
You saw it and then you got behind the wheel and you did it. But in fact, what I also read in your bio was that, again, at quite a young age, you had media credentials. Was that around Formula Drift as well? Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, exactly. So right after that event, I kind of just waited and hoped that Formula Drift would come back to Summit Point, and they never did, unfortunately. But I wanted to become more than a spectator in the drifting world. And I was, 13, 14 at the time. Driving was not an option. My parents don't have a background in motorsport. They don't, they support what I do from the extent of just being supportive in general, but not financially or that kind of thing. So I picked up a video camera because that was something that I did with my skateboard friends. I was a competitive skateboarder when I was in middle school and high school, and had experience, doing these short little videos. And since I had that skill set, I decided I would apply it to motorsport and started shooting local events when I was 14 in 2008. And then a year later, I was shooting professionally at D1 Grand Prix. And then 2010 was the first year that I got a Formula Drift media credential for the New Jersey round. And I kind of had just stumbled my way into networking. I don't think I even knew that was the word at the time because, again, I was a teenager, a very young teenager at the time. And so I had just, built up friends and had kind of proven, my worth, I guess, from a product standpoint of producing and, reliable and entertaining videos. Especially back then, there weren't very many people that were shooting videos, and that was an opportunity that I saw. And so because of that, I was just able to kind of build a reputation where people saw kind of the product. They didn't really see how old I was. And then I think I wrote Formula Drift as just saying, hey, I would like to inquire about getting a media pass or something like that, and somehow got approved. And they didn't ask for an ID until they wanted collateral for a media vest, and then I gave them my learner's permit. So it was a really awesome time to be a part of. I don't know if anyone could do that now, given that Formula Drift has grown significantly since then, but it was really cool to to obviously cover and have the best seat in the house at such a young age, and get to work with teams and drivers like Ryan Turk with Gardella Racing. Back then, I think they helped me get a media pass in 2011, 2012, and then drifting.com was the media entity that helped me get my first media pass at Formula Drift in 2010.
Now everyone's got the smartphone, everyone's walking around. You could take really high resolution film quite easily, but you couldn't then. So did you learn that as you were going, or did you have a passion for sort of videography?
Yeah, it was definitely a learning curve. So I think I started out with a Sony Handycam mini DV style, camcorder, and then worked my way into a VX 2000, which was another mini DV format video camera. And so those are these little cassettes. And then I remember the most difficult thing was learning how to zoom in and focus at the same time, and moving the camera with a tripod. And so that skill took a lot because you ended up, I mean, you wanted to be really smooth with the cars, and they're moving really fast, and it was hard to learn that. And you had to kind of set up the tripod in a specific way, and then capture all the footage. And it was definitely a skill that, it just took a lot of practice. And I was probably out there once a month or once or twice a month, covering these local events in between, obviously the really big once a year for me at the time, rounds of Formula Drift. And, I would shoot. Also, I ended up shooting drag racing. So that ended up becoming the biggest, I guess, job that I had, was shooting for a team that specialized in driving Hondas and Pre-Inter Racing. And I think the first time that I was with them, they won every single class that they had entered, which was, I think, three or four, because they had three or four cars. So it was, getting to shoot different styles of video, as well as cover stuff that was outside of motorsports. I think I shot a wedding once. I did a skateboard instructional DVD, and other just kind of random, I think, school projects and stuff like that kind of all contributed to learning how to shoot and edit, and just the repetition just kind of helped me build that skill set.
Yeah, that's right. Reps is the way to learning anything. But I guess I'm now laughing in my mind about the idea of you shooting a wedding, and maybe they're having their first dance, and you're getting the zoom, the focus, and the pivot all perfect. Probably a bit easier. But tell us, because there's kind of then like maybe almost a decade between that. I don't know when you stopped doing all that, but in your teenage years, through to when you debuted in Formula Drift as a driver 4 seasons ago. So, sort of, you went away and studied. You've got a career, which you do in your sort of 9 to 5. So can you describe how you transitioned from being a wedding photographer and a drift videographer through to where you are today?
Yeah, so I started driving when I was 16, so in the middle of doing all this video stuff, and it was the video stuff was a way to fund the racing stuff, and that was kind of the highest paying job that I could come up with at the time, being a high schooler. So I had started driving, when I was a junior in high school, I guess. That's when I bought my first car, which was a BMW E30. And then throughout college, I was, using my internship money, which was video related, and then I was a DJ and I was a bartender, and I drove the drunk van around. So all of that was kind of funding the car stuff, and that was all happening in the background. But one of my summer internships was for a large defense contractor shooting corporate video, and it honestly sucked all the fun away from it. You couldn't really make somebody sitting in front of a camera blabbling on about security systems really interesting, or I guess maybe you could, maybe it was just not a fit from a creative standpoint for me. But I realized it wasn't going to get me the funding necessary to drive at the Formula Drift level, and I wanted to find something that I really enjoyed, and I ended up stumbling upon the finance route by going to a William and Mary, which is where I went to undergrad, like intro to investment banking, or finance academy 101, I think was the event. Well, that was the title. And they kind of laid out several different paths, and they were saying, hey, if you want to do investment banking, here are the positives, here are the negatives. Positives, you're going to set yourself up for life if you build this skill set. Negatives, you're going to work 100 hours a week, and you're basically not, you're selling your entire time, I would say, for 2 years as an investment banking analyst on Wall Street. But at the same time, it sets you up on a really nice path to either continue in investment banking, switch over to private equity or hedge funds, or you could also go to the corporate development route. But basically, you have a lot of optionality and a very concrete set of skills that a lot of different companies and industries are really hungry for. And so that's sort of the path that I decided to choose on. But at the same time, I was super far behind because this is my junior year of school, and I just hustled to get up to speed really quickly. I was networking my butt off in order to try to get anybody to, give me a shot, basically, and convinced a firm to give me a winter internship, which then led to a summer internship. And then I was recruiting with another firm. Actually, funny enough, they actually sponsor the Williams racing team. So Stevens was the first job I had out of school, and I worked in their New York office in their consumer uh, group and doing sell side M&A. So basically advising companies on selling themselves if they wanted to be put up for sale, and as well as some public equity raises. So I did a follow-on offering for a company that sells lemons called Limonera. I worked on a really cool deal called Bennington Pontoons, where we helped them, a founder owner who had sold the business to private equity. The private equity firm bankrupted the company. He bought it back, grew the crap out of it, and then he ended up selling it again for $825 million US to Polaris, which, they're the super cool off-road vehicle manufacturer. And that was probably, I mean, that's the biggest deal I've ever worked on. And anyway, so after I spent my 2 years on Wall Street, I transitioned from investment banking to private equity. And at the same time, I moved from New York back to DC, where I grew up, and had at that point had funding to build the FRS, or have committed service brand in Delaware build the car. I bought the car originally as just a very stock, normal Scion FRS in Florida, drove it all the way back from Florida to DC. And then a couple months later, took it to committed, and then they worked on it while I was driving my S14, and debuted the car in 2020. And that's the same year that I actually won my pro license. And then 2021 is when I debuted in Formula Drift. So it was a long, winding path to get to where I am today, but it was very intentional. And I would say it's one of those 10-year plans that actually worked out and that I just followed through. I didn't know exactly where the day-to-day tasks were going to be, or and that kind of thing. I just knew the overall vision that I was trying to accomplish, and never deviated from, my dream. And it took a little bit of, obviously different, side steps, I guess, or side quests, as you would like to say, I guess now, in order to get there. But this has been, a life goal of mine that I've been very fortunate to be able to achieve.
I was talking with Ryan about stoicism, and I don't want to butcher the quote late in the evening in the UK, but essentially, fortune being something or luck being something actually that is all about preparation, and when you have the opportunity, being able to execute on it. And clearly, you had the intent and the motivation there, which is it's incredibly. Inspiring to hear that story on one of your side quests, right? So you talked about Wall Street. The only reference I have for Wall Street is US films. I'm thinking of Gordon Gekko in the film Wall Street. You said you kind of give all your time. How many hours sleep a night would you say on average you were clocking up in those years, 2 years?
Yeah. So luckily, I'm not someone who really sleeps a whole lot. So I would say 6 to 6.5 hours is about like that's great. And to be honest, like the hours for me have never really stopped. So despite not working 100 hours a week at one job, I now basically spend 100 hours allocated between both my racing career as well as my day career. Right. And so back then it was really rough. The worst point of my career, and that was my last 6 months at the firm. We're incredibly understaffed. We went from a team of 17 to 7, and that was because people were just pretty fed up with the working conditions and the internal politics, and one after another people of all levels were quitting left and right, and it was brutal. I couldn't leave yet because my intention the entire time was to move back to DC in July, and this started happening in January, February. And during that time, I was working 7 days a week at the office at all hours. I mean, I was there at a Saturday at 4 a.m. It was kind of ridiculous. I was like, well, I mean, most people my age are in New York or at a club or something. And here I am in the office doing a PowerPoint deck or something like ridiculous. So yeah, back then it was probably 4 to 5 hours of sleep every night. And it got to be like incredibly overwhelming. It's not sustainable, right? Like you can't work those hours and feel like a human. Man, I don't know how honestly like to get through it. Like if I had to do it again, it would be just kind of, turn off any personal life wants or dreams for a minute and just focus on trying to survive each day because it is really, really rough. And, obviously Hollywood loves to dramatize it. I do love the Gordon Gekko movie from an entertainment standpoint, as well as Wolf of Wall Street, which is super entertaining. But yeah, I remember watching all of those repeatedly in college, thinking, oh, like that's what it's going to be like. And then in reality, it's obviously very different. I mean, there's no excessive partying. Like you can't excessively party and then work 100 hours a week. That would be impossible, right? And so to me, it was just a lot of just, head down, grinding it out. And there were definitely some really fun moments of living in New York where I did get to have, some really fun experiences, like seeing Dave Chappelle perform at Radio City Music Hall was awesome. I ran into Haley Joel Osment in line for drinks. And then I had like a 20-minute conversation with him, which was super, super cool. And so there were those fun moments that luckily those are kind of what I remember at this point. But then there were a lot of days where, you would get into the office at 9 a.m. and then I would be on a good day getting out at 9 p.m. And then on a busy day, it would be midnight. And then on a man, this sucks at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. And then you would have to turn around and be back in the office at 9 or 9:30. Maybe, yeah, I mean, 10 was kind of pushing it for my office. So it was pretty brutal.
That all adds to the story because you then debut in Formula Drift, or you win your pro license as you mentioned, and over the first 3 seasons you've climbed the rankings. Your sort of season end position has always been higher year on year. So could you tell us a bit about the journey you've been on since obtaining your Formula Drift license, and of course your aspirations for this season?
Yeah. So it is such a big learning curve going from the pro am level to the pro spec level. And the cars are way more powerful. I went from, a 480 horsepower motor to an 800 horsepower motor. And at first it was kind of too much for me to drive. I just had no experience driving anything near that power level. even most of my drifting career, I never had the funding to really drive anything more than 300 horsepower. So the jump from 3 to 500 is pretty big. And then from 5 to 8, which is what I drive now, is also very big. And um, I mean, I think the biggest reason of why that is when you're driving a low horsepower car, you just have to floor it everywhere. And if you let off, then you're not going to be able to complete the run. Whereas if you do that in a high horsepower car, the tires will just blow off. You have to actually modulate the throttle and really be precise with your inputs. And I think that was something that I had to learn and get up to speed on. And, throughout these years, there's just been a constant evolution of what can I improve, from okay, I need, a car that I can drive all the time that is close to my pro car. All right. So that's how I ended up with the FDRX7. It has 400 horsepower. So it's not 800, obviously, but it's another V8 car that has a front steering rack and drives similar enough to my um, Toyota 86 that it is a very comparable practice car. So doing stuff like that, reevaluating the sim, like I'd never used a simulator before a couple of years ago, and now I use it almost every day when I can, and I have the time to, especially to practice. I really only practice the Formula Drift tracks and then the E-Town Gambler, two different tracks, the road course as well as the stadium, which is also a Formula Drift track. But I just repeatedly just get those reps in, try to again do what I can to constantly improve myself, and that's just the driving aspect, right? Like there's also the social media part, there's the partner program, there's the business offering of what can you do as a driver to represent yourself and your sponsors in a way that delivers ROI to them. And all of that kind of has to be figured out on your own. It's not, to the point of like F1 where, you know, the drivers just, I think they get to focus on driving and they don't have to worry about the business aspect as much because they have agents and they have people around them to really build their program for them. And in drifting, in Formula Drift, it's very small. I mean, I don't really know that many people that have agents, and if they do, they're some of the biggest names in the sport, and they also have those names also have a huge support system of bunch of people, from mechanics to media people to business operations people that all build their program. And when you start out in Formula Drift, you're not going to have any of that. So it really is trying to play all positions, or at least as many of them as you can. um, but I think the reason that I've been able to improve upon every year is just reevaluating on an almost daily basis on, hey, what's going well, what's not going well, what are some of the biggest things that I'm trying to accomplish this year or whatever. I do have, monthly, quarterly, and yearly goals that I set and try to adhere to. And so coming into this season, I knew we had a lot of momentum from last season, and there were some car upgrades that, were just going to kind of add to the reliability and overall performance of the car, but they weren't major overhauls. So I just wanted to improve that. Wanted to do the entire Gambler season, which I was only able to do, I think, the last two events from the previous year. And I knew I wanted to hit on some of the bigger events and more unique things. So podcasts were one of those things that was off track that I wanted to do that hadn't really become as big until I would say the Formula Drift podcast with Jacob Gettins. He, as well as the Circle of Drift podcast, which I also did this year, those two have really propelled drifting and given a voice to drivers. And I think that's how I ended up on this one as well. So, that was some of the stuff that I wanted to do off track. And then on track, obviously wanted to improve my championship ranking in Formula Drift, as well as do really well in the Gambler. And so far, those things have come true, although the season isn't over yet. So I really want to do well in Utah. Would love to secure a top 3 position in the championship for Formula Drift ProSpec. And then on the Gambler series, I'm in a really close battle for first in that series. And it'll come down to this last event. And if I could win the championship in that one and get third or better in Formula Drift ProSpec, then I will have definitely accomplished what I've wanted to do from a driving perspective. On a social media perspective, it was to explore new formats with, podcasts, which I've been really fortunate to be able to, get on some of these other podcasts as well as this one and tell my story and try to have people understand my passion behind this motorsport and how basically everything I've done in my life has been a goal or has been a step towards, trying to be a professional driver. But then not only that, one of my overarching like life goals is to have Formula Drift be on the same kind of sentences you would talk about like the NFL, the NBA, MLB, FD. So if I could just, help steer Formula Drift in that direction, whether that's as a driver, whether that's as a business advisor down the line, like I can see different roles for myself, maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road in terms of after I'm done driving. But overall, I just love this sport so much. I want as many people as possible to share that enthusiasm, and I want the entire world to be able to be on the same page of having this passion for this motorsport as I do. So I don't know. I do. I know I just kind of went on for a little bit, but yeah. Again, there's constantly thought about strategic direction for myself and then as a series and what I would love to see that basically it's just everything I've learned from my private equity career has just been don't reinvent the wheel, just add another spoke, meaning hey, just look at something that another adjacent motorsport or even sport or entertainment venue or property, whatever, has done. And just if you take that idea and apply it to, drifting or your business in some context, then that generally will work. I mean, you're already taking something that's been proven out in a similar business or entertainment form. And if you just apply it there, then that's exactly, you're probably going to see success from that.
I was just thinking of like kind of themes and keywords that were coming out as you were speaking. One was kind of learning, because it seems that every scenario you've put yourself in, you've been able to learn, and it's been an iterative and an incremental process. You talked about season on season now in this setting in the prospec, working on the kind of the small percentage gains you can make. So that was the first word that came out. Then I felt a real passion that you have for the sport overall, and your vision for where you can take the sport, even if it isn't as a driver, but possibly as a driver. Ambition. You only want to get a top three finish in the prospec and possibly win the Gambler. I mean, good luck. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But the final one was sort of I don't know, telepathy, because you started answering my next question, which was, do you see kind of read across between your two careers?
Yeah. So I would say I love building teams, and that is exactly what you do as a private equity professional. Like I would never say I can run a business better than a management team, but I know I can assemble a management team better than most people because I've done it before, right? I know what to look for in terms of qualities that make somebody a really good CEO or a great growth person or a great VP of finance or CFO, that kind of thing. And I've spoken to dozens and dozens. I've interviewed them for different positions at different companies that I've helped build over the years. And that also applies to racing, right? In terms of when I build my team, like I knew the type of leadership I wanted from my crew chief, from my spotter, from my mechanics. I knew what type of character I wanted, somebody who was reliable, was passionate, would show up every day, giving everything they had, and was just really excited to be there. And so I think those two worlds collide when you're talking about, building teams. And then ultimately, seeing the inner workings of, board level decisions and M&A and all these other types of things of how business operates has really influenced my view of how drifting should be from the team level, from the organization level, and it's kind of gotten me to focus on the bigger items that matter. Like I feel like I have a lens where I try not to get distracted by every little detail. I try to focus very narrowly into the most important things and then kind of let other things just fall where they may, I guess, and let other people worry about different aspects. So from a driver perspective, I rely heavily upon my crew chief and mechanics to deliver me a car that I can be very confident in and not have to question whether or not a bolt is checked or loose or etc. Do you know what I mean? And if I have, or when I do have, inputs on, setup, I just try to, be very clear about how the car is operating, and I let them figure out what to do in terms of how to make it better. Like I don't necessarily have the full knowledge of what I want to change. Like I do have ideas, but I try to surround myself by people that are much smarter than me, and that also applies in the business world as well. So I know I have a particular skill set, which is getting deals done, getting M&A done. I've done more than a dozen and probably $1.3 billion worth of transaction value at this point in both buy side and sell side M&A. And I've built platforms from doing, buying one business, then acquiring several other ones, integrating them, and then exiting as well. And so I know that's like my skill set. And in my current role, like as vice president of strategy at Intelligent Group, I tend to let, the others lead in their that's my idea of a team. I really like it when a bunch of individuals have different skill sets and can combine as one to build something that is much greater than if you just have five of the same person with the same knowledge. Like you're not going to get that much, you know, better as a team, because if you all know the same thing, then there's no different perspective being, brought to the table, right? And so in Intelligent, like I don't try to I be I try to be supportive in areas where trust others that know and have done a particular job way longer than I have, that they know the best direction to go to, and if I can support them from an execution standpoint, happy to do so. But when it comes to M&A and deal making, that's where my expertise comes in, and then that's where I like to lead. So in the growth team, my direct boss is the head of growth, and he spends a lot of time on the organic growth opportunities. I spend a lot of time on the inorganic growth opportunities, meaning acquisitions. And on the racing side of things, I am not the best mechanic. Like, yes, I do work on my own cars. Not my Toyota 86. I've outsourced that. But on my RX-7, I am turning the wrench constantly. With that being said, if there's a design or an engineering type of problem, I do have a lot of knowledge at this point because I've been around it for so long, but I'm not going to be the one who reinvents the motor being built in terms of getting a little bit more power out of it, right? Like I can drive it, but I'm going to rely on somebody who's an expert at engine building to help find that extra, 10% power level or whatever. So I think it really becomes, you can't be an expert on every single thing, but you can specialize in a particular skill set and then surround yourself with others that can fill in the rest of the pieces of the puzzle to create a whole entity that's much stronger than just your individual knowledge.
I think that's the most unique answer I've heard asking that question. A few people we've interviewed, drivers, have a kind of a second career, and the read across is never assembling a team or having the strength of judgment to do that, which is fantastic. But something they all do suggest is really difficult is finding the backing to go racing. It's the age old challenge. Do you you talked about return on investment, in fact, and focusing on how you can ensure you're delivering value for your sponsors. Could you talk a little bit about that, like how you go about finding them and how you go about keeping them happy and growing that sponsorship?
Yeah, so I think over the years I've built a unique program that I am very confident has a different service offering than other drivers. And the way I did that was I kind of focused on things that were outside of just the social media aspect as well as the driving aspect. Because I mean, in reality, there or what are there like 46 or 47 other drivers that also have in ProSpec that also have a social media page that also are posting, recaps and etc. So, okay. So from a sponsor point of view, you're just one of 47. Okay. Well, how do you narrow that down? Well, I do a halftime show, which totally stole the idea from Von Gittin because I saw that he did a halftime show, but he only had like a megaphone and he was kind of just throwing stuff into the crowd. And I decided, okay, well, I'm going to take that idea and then I'm going to add production value to it, which I had from a skill set point of view from my DJing career. And so I make a mix for every single halftime show that we do. It runs half an hour. I incorporated other elements into it in terms of not only do we do product toss, but we incorporate the audience doing Q&As with them, as well as bringing other drivers into the show to have it not just be a show about me, but also a show with, some of the best drivers in the series. So we do the halftime show off the lift gate, which is another aspect of it that Vaughn hadn't done, elevating it to a bigger stage and having more of a production thematic, theme or whatever around this show. Really took someone else's idea and then again added another spoke, made it my own. It is my own show, like it is my own format. And over the years of kind of really focused on making it as entertaining as possible. And there are so many other things that I would love to do with it with a little bit more funding, that then it becomes a pitch to a sponsor saying, hey, look what we've already done. Here are my next like 2 or 3 ideas that I want to do to elevate it to another level. Would you be interested in supporting that? So the halftime show is one unique aspect of my program that very few others have. And I'm going to even argue that it is the biggest halftime show in the Formula Drift paddock, whether that's pro or pro spec, because of the reach that we have, the number of people that show up, and that the number of people that are engaged the entire time. That full half hour or more will have the entire area in front of the GT Radial booth packed with people. And I think that's hard to do. Like, I think Bonds only lasted a couple, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And so again, it's just trying to come up with production value and taking ideas like what I've seen in F1, where the 2 drivers from every team come out onto a stage, and the amount of excitement from the fans is also something that influenced like that show. So that's part of makes my that's part of what makes my program stand out. I also do a really interesting data collection program, where I basically am able to deliver a bunch of value to partners through data acquisition of the fans that are there. And it's really useful for them. And it's something that's more, you wouldn't necessarily, I mean, if you come to my pit area, you'll, I think, probably see it's pretty obvious of how I'm doing it. But there's a data collection program, there's the halftime show, there's obviously the social media and branding and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that unique combination and aligning with what the sponsors are looking for in terms of marketing ROI has really allowed me to build really great relationships with folks like Steck, with Moroso, with Fuel Lab, GT Radial, Fortunato, and there are plenty of others. And I think the biggest thing that you can do as a driver, though, is to actually deliver. There are so many drivers out there that, okay, yay, they somehow convinced somebody to sponsor them, and then they fail to do any of the things that they've said to do. And I've had sponsors tell me this. It's like, yeah, we didn't expect you to deliver us like the biggest value at the beginning of the year, but you consistently showed up, you consistently over delivered on things that you promised. And here we are at the end of the year, and we're going to cut this other person's funding and give it to you because you did such a great job. And then the other person didn't do anything, right? And so it's that kind of thing. And then building these relationships over time, and again, proving and being in constant communication with your partners and making sure they're happy, or if there's something that they're not happy about, then you got to course correct, right? And so luckily, like I have had a sit down with all of the sponsors like about a month ago to have kind of a mid-year review, and every single one of them was very happy with what I had done. And by doing that, I basically went through the agreement that we had signed and picked apart like the deliverables on my end that I promised I was going to do. I showed that, in the first 6 months of the year, I've actually already accomplished every single thing that I promised to do before the end of the year. And so basically at this point, like everything that I've delivered upon from now to the end of the year is on top of what I had already promised, because I'd already knocked out all of those deliverables before the halfway point of this year. And it was just something that I knew I could do. And there are also just, opportunities like this one where I didn't forecast at the beginning of the year, but I was really hoping something like this would pop up, because there are always these random one-off opportunities that kind of come up and that you jump upon because you never know where they can lead. So it's just doing a good job of not only selling, your program at the front end, but delivering on the back end. And when you can do both of those things, good things tend to happen.
You've got me wanting to sponsor you, and I haven't got any money, so can't make you laugh when you're drinking from your Steck water bottle. So I think our listeners are really keen to hear a bit more about what it's like to have 800 horsepower under your foot. I was just thinking when you said 800, like how much land would you need to have 800 horses? There, like it is a lot of horses. So can you tell us a bit about your driving style, a bit about your strengths, and sort of maybe it's impossible to describe, but what is it like to wrangle a car that has 800 horsepower?
Yeah, so I guess, the easiest question is probably the last one. And to me, I've always described drifting as controlling your own roller coaster. So it's just like riding a roller coaster, but hopefully you're not going upside down. That would be really bad. And luckily that's never happened to me before, knock on wood. Um, but the amount of acceleration is super intense. And the difference between going from a 140 horsepower car, which is what I started with when I was 16, to an 800 horsepower car now, is that things come at you way faster when you're at a 820 horsepower level. And at the same time, it is such a blast to drive. And I think as you get better, you become less afraid of the car and more focused on hitting your marks. And it's really, really fun. It's such a blast to be able to have the privilege to drive such a crazy machine. And I know that when we make it to pro, like, we'll up the power even more and also go on a bigger tire, which will make the car even faster. So I know there's still like room to grow in the sport for sure, from like a driving experience standpoint. So I'm really excited to eventually get to that next level of car. But it is incredible, and it's the best feeling in the world to be able to have that much power under your foot, not be afraid of it. And then when you're, chasing somebody down and you hit every single mark that you wanted to hit at the end of the run, you just know that you just did an awesome job. And like, that's the best feeling in the world. And then, well, almost, I guess the best feeling in the world is being on the podium, spraying the champagne everywhere, and feeling like you've accomplished exactly what you've set out to do. Like, that feels awesome. And then in terms of my own driving style, I would say it's characterized by probably two different things. One that's just straight up speed. I think a lot of my competitors, they tell me after that we battle, they're like, "Oh, I knew you were going to be really fast," and then they're like, "Oh man, like that's either why they hit me or why they tried to grip the car up a lot to keep up." Which I don't really think about that, I guess, to be honest. I just try to drive the line that I try to drive, and I guess it just happens to be fast because I don't really lift a whole lot. Um, but then the other piece is I love doing these big, faint entries, and it was something that I realized early on into my FD career, which was back when there was single run qualifying. The judges would immediately dock you, I'm guessing, like 10 points if you did not flick your entries. And so I learned very quickly that I needed to flick every single entry that I did. And I had learned to do that at Richmond International Raceway. There was a course in my grassroots days that kind of required that, or I realized that it was riskier to do, because what you were doing was you were clutch kicking towards a wall. So basically getting the car rotated and pointed at a wall. And then at the last second, switching the car back and kind of brushing your rear end against the wall. And it was really scary to do because you're pointed at a wall. And if you mess up and you don't end up switching back and transitioning, then you're just going to plow straight into a concrete wall, and that's going to hurt. So um, most people, for a couple of different courses that I can think of, like New Jersey being one, they don't like to point the car at the wall going sideways, because there is a risk that if you lose control, you're going to crash. But that's something that I've taken and realized that I can just make that my advantage by having the commitment to be able to do that, and also the practice and skill to pull it off every single time. And so, yeah, the big flick entries, the high speed entries as well. Like I love going really, really fast. I maxed my RX-7 out at 122 in South Carolina Motorsports Park this year, and that was, I think, faster than anybody had entered that weekend. I could be wrong though, at that particular track. But not being afraid to push, the speed as well as the style from a flick entry standpoint are probably the two things that I would say make me stand out as a driver. One thing to add to that would be the aggressive chases. There's something that I learned this year, which was to me new, which was being able to transition right on somebody's door and jumping through the smoke screen and making it stick. And I did that in New Jersey a couple of times. With the most notable was definitely my top 32 run with Margaritas Katsunitas. So somebody that I had battled before previously was confident I would be able to transition and just land right on his door and then stick with him. And I think, that's has been repeated before in terms of people have told me that my chases are really aggressive. And over the years, I've just gotten more and more comfortable at being close and not worrying about hitting or anything like that. And I really don't hit people very often. So I definitely have been hit more times than I've hit people. So not that I'm a violent person. It's just, I guess, how things have worked out.
Yeah, exactly. That disclaimer is there for all the world to hear. Brilliant. So, we know your time is precious. You work a long week between your two passions. So we're not long off the end of the episode. But before we go, I'm just interested to hear if you have the time to follow other motorsport and whether you'd ever had the chance to try a car from a different series or even just going go-karting.
Yeah, so I definitely do follow major motorsports. I would say Formula One, big fan of Lewis and Mercedes. Well, I guess he's going to Ferrari next year. I will say, like, my first racing suit in Formula Drift was red to, as an homage to Ferrari. And so, with that being said, I would say Lewis is my favorite Formula One driver, but I really just love of an engaging race. I mean, I would say I like Red Bull's color theme probably the most. And so, yeah, I follow Formula One pretty closely. And then I also follow NASCAR. I usually don't have time to watch the whole races. I watch the highlights of both series. Um, and yeah, so I mean, I do love motorsport. And in terms of other driving experiences, I do have a touch and go 125cc go kart that unfortunately I don't get to use a whole lot, but I did start doing that when I was in the middle of the pandemic. I guess this is kind of before I had the Formula Drift license and had a little bit more free time. And it's a really, really fun experience. Like, I love wheel to wheel racing, would love the opportunity to drive anything else on a track. And I guess that's kind of the only. I'm trying to think. I did have a chance to drive a Ferrari 488 on Homestead Speedway, the road course there a couple of years ago. So that was really fun. I haven't done a ton of like grip driving at racetracks, in a regular size car, but I've done the go-karting stuff and think that's really, really fun.
I love that because you're in the drift world. You see the rest of the world as the grip world, and I love that. I love that. You are the main guys, and we're the other. That's great. Brilliant. Okay, well, look. Before we close, we have two questions. One is a very logistical one, which is where can people follow your exploits and keep up with your career?
Yeah, so feel free to check me out on Instagram at nathaniel.chen, on Facebook at Nate Chen Racing, and on YouTube at nate.chen.
Brilliant. It's almost like you've had practice in reeling off those handles, but professionally done. So the final question is around food, because we love our food here on Stripping the Dipping. It's what gave us our name. So the setup question, maybe you'll be the first person we ever meet that says no here, but I presume that on occasion you enjoy the good pizza.
Yeah, I love pizza.
Brilliant. Okay, so this is a polemic. It's a yes or no. Pineapple on pizza.
Yes, but my biggest thing is ranch on pizza, like, or dipping pizza in ranch. That is probably my favorite thing once I discovered that, there's never any turning back. And so I love ranch with pizza the most.
Wow. We might need to change that last question and do a whole new series. We've asked that of Mario Andretti, basically everyone that we've ever interviewed. You were quite a strong yes, and I think Georgie is going to love that. She's sort of team pineapple. I'm not, but interesting ranch. To be honest, as a Brit, as a fully qualified Brit, I have no idea what ranch dressing tastes like. Maybe one day, a bit like Wall Street, maybe one day I'll learn what it really is like.
Well, the ironic part about Wall Street is that nobody's actually on Wall Street anymore. All the offices moved away from there. So it was actually Midtown was where Park Avenue and Midtown is where all the Wall Street banks actually are. And Wall Street itself is just a tourist trap. So hopefully you don't actually go to Wall Street expecting to see Gordon Gekko wandering around, because that's actually on Park Avenue in Midtown. So, but yeah, I mean, if you're ever in the States and need pizza places to go to, or happy to take you to Andy's Pizza down here in Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. That's my favorite pizza in D.C. So, and they have ranch with their pizza. So it's awesome. It's a great New York style slice. Super, super good.
You never know. My wife might let me have a week's vacation in the US just on my own, just to sample the pizza and the drifting. Then, you might see me. But look, guys, if you've made it this far into the episode, you know what you need to do. Give this episode a thumbs up or a 5-star review wherever you listen to us or indeed watch us. And also give us a comment. We are at Strip the Dip on all good social media. We want the feedback, but also we want to know who you'd love us to interview next. So until next time, it's been my great pleasure to have Nate Chen with us. But this has been F1 Blag, the latest ever episode we've ever recorded, and I'm about to go to bed. But until then, good night.